Well, as Greta pointed out, these two stories, one of which we still have up on our screen, we can keep it up there, Eric. It's a good, exhibits startling chronological differences. In fact, it might be helpful if we see these side by side. So side by side. So in the story that I read, again, it's a later creation story, but it comes first in the Bible. And the story that Greta read, an earlier story, but it comes second. They're totally out of chronological order. They make no sense, put side by side. In my story, light is the first thing, but in Greta's, earth and heavens are sort of already there. It said God created them, but they're there. And then sky and water comes next on my side. For Greta, it was a stream, but it's sort of hard to tell, is a stream, it said it was just sort of already there. It doesn't necessarily say God made that stream. And then earth, oceans, plants, man, sun, moon, stars, garden and plants, fish, birds, and sea monsters. So, Peter, if you want to know who made sea monsters, it was God. And all animals. That's very different from my story, because in my story, it's fish, birds, and sea monsters, swimming, flying things, and then on the sixth day, it's land animals. But in the story that Greta read, it's all the animals all at once. And just in case you think humans are necessarily special, in my story, we were made at the same time as cattle and pigs. Same day. We don't have our own special day. So what's up? What's up with this? Like, we can't have this. We can't have two stories with dramatically different accounts of how the earth and the universe and the stars and the ocean and water and us and our children were created. We have to have consistency. This can't be. Or can it? Maybe the point of these two stories is not to account for the cosmological creation of the universe. Maybe the point for us as Christians is not to look at these two dramatically different stories that make no sense side by side. Maybe we're not supposed to try and gain scientific knowledge from them. Maybe there's a deeper meaning that we can gain from these two stories. It might not be about the Big Bang, but it might be about our life with God. And to get there, to shift us from thinking about these two creation stories, which do not talk about the scientific creation of the universe, but do talk about our beautiful relationship with God, we're going to look at some similarities. There are 5 similarities between these two stories. As different as they are chronologically, here's the similarities. Number 1, humans manage animals and land. Humans manage animals and land. Now, in both the stories that we read, this is a similarity, both number 1 and number 2. God creates animals and vegetation and then does what with them? God controls them? God manages all the animals and the birds and the plants? Does God name them in the story that Greta read? No. The man, who doesn't have a name yet, by the way, not until chapter 4 does the man become Adam. So we're still at just the man. The man names them. God creates them and says, you name them. And then also in the story that I read, we are supposed to subdue and have dominion over the things that God created. Now, it's a carryover from inexact biblical linguistic scholarship to say that dominion means domination. More recent scholarship linguistic scholarship tells us that nurture, manage, care for is a more accurate translation of the Hebrew vocabulary for this. Okay, so the second similarity between these two is that man and woman, the two created beings, are dependent on each other. They are, in the story I read, they are created simultaneously. Most of us really default to the Adam being put to sleep and having a rib taken out story. We forget that in one of the two stories, man and woman are created simultaneously on the same day together, both in the image of God. And despite that, in the creation story that Greta read, the woman is created because God recognizes that the man is lonely and needs a helper or a partner. Now, before any of us begin to think that helper or partner places man here and woman here, the word that is used in the Hebrew, azar, the word is azar, is also used of God in Psalms, Psalm 121, to talk about how God cares for the psalmist when the psalmist needs spiritual and physical and emotional support. So in the same relationship that God has with the psalmist in Psalms, the Hebrew word azar, helper, partner, is the same relationship between the man and the woman. They are dependent on each other. Third, and now we're really getting hot. You're going to kind of notice that each of these 5 examples crescendos until number 5. The very 5th one is more broad and more expansive. So that's where we're going right now, and we're getting into the hot section. Humans share creative power with God. You sure about that? Share creative power. We don't share anything with God. Like, God's above and beyond us. How can we share creative power? I mean, I really thought that God just sat up in the clouds and makes this amazing place, Garden of Eden, throws Adam and Eve into it, and that Adam and Eve are sort of like perfectly created AI robots. Is that what God did? In either story, is that what God did? No. In both stories, God creates and then hands over that to us, not just to manage, but to creatively embrace and exist with God's creation. We are creative partners with God. We don't create any of the raw material. We don't create the tree that produced the crosses that Don DeYoung made for us. Don made that. If you ask Don who cut all those little tiny pieces, the hundreds of them, God did not. But the power to have the skill to cut the pieces was given by God. The power to build, to grow the tree came from God. We are co-creative powers with God. Fourth, and lest we ever forget, number 4, God's power is dominant. In both creation stories, number 1 and number 2, the one I read and the one that Greta read, who creates first? And this is not rhetorical, so you can call it out. Who creates first? God. Someone said God, right? Couldn't tell who. I'm pretty sure someone said God. But that's the right answer. Someone did. God always creates first, but not last. God does not create in isolation. And fifth, it's not static. This world we have, the things in it, the things we are as human beings, not static. In each story, after God hands over creation to the management of human beings, the landscape of life is changed, and changed by humans. And this is a good thing. Now, obviously, it's also a sort of bad thing, as we know from Adam and Eve and the snake and the apple and getting expelled. Yes, we get that, but don't jump there right away. The thing, our interaction with creation is not always bad. We are sinners, but we are good. And we are good because God created us in God's image. There's goodness in us. Now, God could have created all of this stuff that our two stories talked about, and then God could have propped up her feet on this huge big desk and looked over the creation and said, now, ain't that perfect? And then God could have said to the divine council, there's this divine council in Hebrew mythology, you know, I was thinking about putting some humans down in this creation, you know, but that would just screw it all up. Why would I do that? Never for an instant did God think that we would not be here. God wants us here. God wants you here. And God looks upon you as a creative entity in this life. We are all invited to enjoy creation, to adapt it, to alter it, to work for the eternal goodness that God has in mind for creation. What a wonderful gift. Amen.